Hello, everyone. We are back with yet another episode of Superannuated Starman. This is episode 43.
Objection!
Not so fast, Past Sean. That's a contradiction. If this is episode 43, how is our last episode also number 43? This is clearly episode 44. You'd know that if you actually proofread your outline. Your Honor, I move that this new evidence be admitted to the court. Now that that's done, go ahead, Past Sean. I am Sean Ryan, and I'm joined yet again by Cory Braucks, and Cory Braucks alone.
Objection!
Unfortunately, Chris is still feeling under the weather, so he's not going to be with us today, but you just heard Cory make an objection. We're going to be talking about Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, one of my favorite games, and something that I'm very excited to talk about. Cory, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing fabulous, stuperiferous. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty great. I'm in between classes right now, so I've got a lot of free time on my hand, and I expect a lot of it is going to be editing. So, gotta look forward to that.
Well, that'll be exciting.
Yeah, I wish I could say it's exciting, but it's definitely not. But with that out of the way, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the history of this game. Tired of point-and-click adventures and visual novels set in haunted mansions, far-off alien worlds, or the nightlife of downtown, Shu Takumi envisioned a game that didn't take place in any of those settings and instead wanted to see the player take the role of a novice defense attorney as he battled it out in a court of law, desperately trying to get his client declared not guilty. But there were some doubts to whether a game based on defending alleged criminals in the legal system would be successful. But belief in Takumi's vision paid off for Capcom, producing 6 mainline titles, several spin-offs, and compilations. Produced and published by the aforementioned Capcom, the Ace Attorney series, better known as, I'm going to butcher this, Gyakuten Saiban, or Turnabout Trial as it's known in Japan, started out life as a Game Boy Advance title. Released in Japan on October 12th of 2001, it wouldn't see a localization in North America until 4 years later when it released on the Nintendo DS. On October 11th, 2005, with enhanced gameplay and updated visuals. Because of Takumi's success as the director for the cult classic Dino Crisis 2, Capcom gave him creative license to make any game he wanted with the constraints of a smaller budget, a less experienced development team, and only 6 months to create his vision. Regardless of these limitations, development started on the title sometime in 2000 as a hybrid of a visual novel and adventure game. Originally planned for release on the Game Boy Color, after the development team saw footage of Mega Man Battle Network for the Game Boy Advance, development quickly shifted to Nintendo's newest handheld console. Originally, the main character was meant to be a private investigator, but this changed to the protagonist being a defense attorney. But Takumi wanted to include elements of detective work, where the player will question potential witnesses and discover clues to prove his client's innocence. The main gameplay mechanic revolving around using those clues found to help find contradictions in witness testimony. When it came to localizing the game, a lot of thought was put into the protagonist's name. The main character in Japan is known as Ryuichi Naruhado, the surname being a Japanese expression meaning I understand. The name was changed in the Western release to Wright, with a W as a play on the word right as in correct, with the name Phoenix being chosen because of how heroic it sounded. Other names that were considered included Pierce, Xavier, Marcus, and Zane. Miles Edgeworth, as he's known in North America, goes by Mitsurugi. This is likely another similar situation, as Tsurugi is a type of double-edged sword which may be a reference to the duality of Edgeworth, someone that wants to protect others by harshly punishing those he feels are wrong. The localization was handled by writer Alexander Smith and editor Steve Anderson, who were unfamiliar with the Ace Attorney series before working on it, which led to some complications for the franchise. In the Japanese version of the game, it's set in Japan, whereas the Western release wanted to be a bit more vague, but due to the first episode involving time zones as a crucial plot point, the pair chose California as the game's setting. This became an issue in later games where the game's setting is clearly based on Japan. On that topic, I'm going to throw in some trivia bits here. In the Japanese version, the victim takes a trip to New York to account for the time difference. In the international, non-French version, she travels to Paris, France. However, in the French version, she travels to Sydney, Australia. Another tidbit, the passport in the Japanese version is red to match the Japanese passport. This was changed to blue for all other regions.
My passport was brown.
What do you mean was brown?
I think my passport was like brown colored when I had one.
I mean, maybe that's just the color on the screen that you were looking at.
No. Like my actual passport. I had a passport like over a decade ago, and I'm pretty sure it was brown.
You're talking about your physical, in real life passport.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like when I had a passport last, I think it was brown.
Mine's always been blue, so I don't know. But perhaps one of the best known aspects of the Ace Attorney series is its fun and colorful dialogue with a lot of wordplay and puns that mirror the equally colorful cast of characters. In the Japanese version of the game, each character's name relies on Japanese wordplay, so a lot of freedom was given to Smith and Anderson for the minor characters, but reoccurring and main characters had to be approved by Capcom. With only 7 people on the development team, including Takumi himself, who worked as the director, scenario designer, and planner, and after 10 months of intense work and late nights, the game was released in Japan to moderate commercial success, but very high praise from critics. Once news of the courtroom-based visual novel / point-and-click adventure reached overseas, a DS port was in the works that included a brand new 5th episode, Rise from the Ashes. This new episode included features that weren't possible on the Game Boy Advance. One such feature was using the DS's microphone that would be used to blow away dust, revealing fingerprints. This idea came from Capcom of America's staff and wasn't well received by the Japanese development team, but Takumi thought it was important to make the American audience happy, so it was included in the game.
USA.
Since the release of the original game on Game Boy Advance in 2001, the first 3 games in the series, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, and the sequels, Justice for All, and Trials and Tribulations, have been available as a collection on iOS, the Xbox Game Store, PlayStation Network, and the Nintendo eShop. There were other platforms and collections that had been made available, but they were discontinued, such as the Wii and 3DS. If you're looking to find a physical edition of the Switch release, you're not going to find it in North America. Instead, it was only made available in Japan. However, the latest collection of Ace Attorney games, 4, 5, and 6, starring Apollo Justice, are available on every modern platform, and there is a retail version that is available for purchase in North America. One notable thing about this collection, the 5th and 6th installments of the franchise were digital releases only in the US, and unless you got them on 3DS when you had the chance, this is one of the only ways to play them. I think that's going to wrap it up, unless you have something else you wanted to say, Cory?
Well, I just want to talk about a little sidebar of like how popular this series has become to the point where not only was there a movie adaptation, but there was also a like 3-season TV spinoff as well.
Yes, I've watched the movie in its entirety, and I've seen quite a few of the episodes that are entirely anime, which is fabulous.
Yeah, the movie's live action, by the way, for everyone listening.
And you can find it if you Google hard enough.
It looks absurd.
It takes basically the same story beats directly from the game, and especially the 4th trial, which is probably the main focus of the entire film.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
With all that out of the way, let's take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to discuss our histories of the game, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. Welcome back, everybody. So, I'm going to start it off and talk about some of my memories of the game. So, I had first heard about this game through a video game forum called NeoGAF, which has kind of fallen to the wayside in recent years. But I can distinctly remember reading about these other members talking about this point and click adventure involving lawyers. And my first thought was, that sounds dumb as hell. But I kept tabs on it, at least in this little internet bubble, because it was very, very popular in that circle. And I think it was around a year later or so that I walked into my local GameStop and I saw it complete in box, which, if you don't know, is very, very rare for GameStop, who is notorious for throwing out all the boxes for DS titles. And I thought, what the hell, I'll try it. And in fact, it's weird, I know, but one of the things I do with games that I buy is that I keep the receipts. And I bought this on September 28th, 2006. I got it for, it looks like, less than 20 bucks. So I took it home and I didn't play it and I promptly threw it on my shelf and I didn't touch this game for like 5 years. I don't remember what drove me to trying it. And it might have been the fact that there was nothing really on the 3DS launch, but I threw it in and I was blown away. I thought it was smart and engaging, but also managed to be funny while covering some morbid topics like murder, obviously. I was so enraptured in this game that I would opt to yell, hold it, and objection into the microphone. And I can remember this one time that I was deployed and I was playing, and we had a pretty nice setup where we were actually in a building. It was more of a shack, but we had walls, which is kind of rare for where we were in the part of the world. And we had some semblance of privacy, but it wasn't soundproof whatsoever. And I played that game whenever I had the chance. And apparently, it was upsetting one of my colleagues because after saying hold it for probably the millionth time, I remember him yelling, shut the up before I break that toy, which I thought was hilarious. There's absolutely no way that he would have ever done anything like that, but I did stop using the microphone and I was a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? I was a little more
Considerate.
considerate. There we go. I was a little more considerate of my colleagues,
I
roommates, I
think
guess.
it would have been funnier if he had yelled overruled when you said objection.
It was a really funny moment and it stuck out in my head. And that was, oh my gosh, that was almost 12 years ago. But needless to say, I was a huge fan of screaming at the DS, and I really loved paying attention to the little pieces of evidence I'd collected and listening to the witness testimony, trying to pull it apart and find the contradiction. It was just an amazing concept, an amazing experience. It really drove me to go back and buy the rest of the series in physical form. And since then, I've become that weirdo that I bought a Japanese copy of the original trilogy for Switch. It does have an English option, by the way. Like I mentioned, I've seen the Ace Attorney film, I've watched the anime, and I've just become a really big fan of the franchise in general. I can't say that every episode is golden because there's some really god awful cases, but I will say that the games are consistently great, and especially in this first game, each of the episodes are really well done, and I think they are some of the best in the series. Cory, with my experiences out of the way, why don't you tell us about your history with the game?
All right, so I figured it out. The one that I played originally was called Dual Destinies, where he adds in his little junior partner or whatever. And I don't have too much recollection of that game, except for the fact that they have it's like a mood system or something where like you can like judge your
Yeah,
people's like emotional responses. It was a weird extra thing that was kind of thrown in there, and it made for some interesting gameplay. But I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was like an interesting take on kind of like the visual novel storytelling, and it gave you, more interaction. Because sometimes these games, like the gaming medium, has always been wonderful because like you can tell a story and you can do it in a lot of different ways. You can, have something like Half Life where it's like minimal dialogue and a lot of shooting and running around, things like Doom and that nature, and you can get super in depth with storytelling. Things like Fahrenheit comes to mind. I don't remember what the American localization of that title is.
I want to interject with a lot of those games, there's a lot of environmental storytelling as well.
Yeah, so like I thought this was just such a fun way to do it, and it's just this interesting kind of take on the genre. Like you said, a lot of these point and clicks are like you investigating like haunted houses or very spooky, and a lot of like straightforward kind of railroading. And this one, oh, it's Indigo Prophecy. That's what the American title I think is. But anyway,
I love that game.
yeah, but like it's a great title, but it's a lot of it was just like kind of on rails, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like this where you have to kind of gather evidence, and there's almost a way to like screw up and lose if you're not, paying attention to what you're doing. It did add this element of like there's actual kind of things hanging in the balance if you're not on the ball. So like it just was a lot of fun playing through it as a kid. I mean, not as a kid, it was like what 15 years ago, so it was probably my 20s, early 20s.
We're old enough that we consider them to be
Yeah.
kids now. So
But yes, I mean, like it was just kind of this cool thing, and this was a DS title that I was playing, I believe. But a lot of it, Phoenix Wright's gotten to popular enough where like there's memes made about it, and like we said, there's like two spin-offs, and there's a huge collection of titles now for the games.
and he was a fighter in Marvel versus Capcom.
Yeah, and he's a fighter, and I think he's even one of the in Smash Bros. I think he's one of the little power up tokens that you can add on single player. So, like, he's popped up quite a bit.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's definitely got a massive following, and I really hope that there's more games, but that's kind of for later talk. If you don't have anything else, I have a very small little bit of trivia that I can kind of extend this segment out a little bit.
Throw it at me.
So, if you're playing the Japanese version of the DS game on your DS, and remember, the original DS and DS Lite were not region locked. But if you're playing with a copy of the Japanese version of the game in the GBA slot, the first four cases are unlocked from the beginning. This feature exists for both sequels, but was removed from the international releases because the game never came out on the Game Boy Advance. And this isn't necessarily trivia, but maybe my own little theory, I guess. So, Phoenix often goes by the nickname Nick, with Larry Butts being the first one to use it, but it's never really mentioned as to why he's called that. But I think, this is my little theory, that it's a shortened version of Phoenix or just Nick.
Yeah, that's what my assumption was.
I mean, I had no idea. It was always kind of like drove me wild while playing this game. I was like, why do they keep calling him Nick? And I just racked my brain. I was like, Phoenix, Nick? I don't know. That was my own little personal revelation, but now I feel like an idiot because you're like, yeah, no.
No, I mean, I just thought that was like the really logical conclusion to it.
Well, now I feel like an idiot, but that's fine. We can just move on to the next segment. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoy that music. So I'm going to start off with my replay of Ace Attorney.
How did that music go?
What?
How did the music go?
Oh, I haven't put the music together yet. I have no idea what I'm.
Uh, I think it went like this. Da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da.
I'm not putting in Gal's theme. I might put in Gal's theme.
Yeah, you are. Yeah,
All
you
right,
are.
I'm
All
going to
right,
put in a little
continue,
Gal's
please.
theme. So I decided to play this game on the Switch, not my physical copy. That's still sealed. I bought this digitally a while back, and by the way, you can get this for like $10. So if you see it, grab it. I think it's a great game, but we'll get into that later.
I mean, as always, anything that's on Steam is always on sale at least 6 times a year. So
That's very true. But with this game, the first case is an introductory one with a simple premise. You watch the murder play out, so you go into the case knowing exactly what happened. But now you have to use the clues to get your client off the hook for the murder that he's been framed for. The murderer and key witness is a character called Frank Saw It, which is obviously another pun on yes, he saw it happen. He was the murderer.
Dude, there's so many puns. Like even the dialogue is like saw it more like did it. Like oh
Yeah,
man.
some of them are a little cringeworthy, but initially, I think the audience for this game was meant to be kind of a younger teenager, maybe not too young, because it is murder. But what is this game rated? Is it T for teen?
Think it's teen. But yeah, a lot of it's just cringy wordplay. Like you're talking about with Wright and Wright the whole time, man, if there was not like dialogue that you could read, it would be so confusing just to listen to this game
Yeah,
sometimes.
for sure. Absolutely. And watching the anime, it sometimes happens that way as well. So in that first trial, your client is your childhood best friend, Larry Butts, and
Harry
he's
Butts.
annoying as hell, which can be said for a lot of characters, but the case is easy enough. It's meant to be a tutorial on how to go about playing the game and how to think beyond the clues that you're given to solve the mystery. The second trial is great in my opinion because you have to take those basic gameplay principles that you just learned and apply them. And it's immediately apparent that not every case is going to be as quick and simple as the first one, but I do have some gripes about the case. On the third day of the trial, Red White has to revise his testimony after you continue to press him
Like
about
16
his supposed
times.
facts. Yeah, over and over again. And he testifies that you, the you being Phoenix Wright, had hit Mia Fey twice, and you're supposed to present the autopsy report. But I think that it should have allowed for April May's testimony because she mentioned specifically that the victim dodges the first attack and then was struck by the second one. But the judge will penalize you for using this evidence instead of the actual report. And now's a good time to bring up the penalty system because you mentioned earlier that you can screw up. And if you make too many errors, that is like if you submit the wrong evidence or just submit something entirely inappropriate, you can lose the case and the judge will declare your client guilty.
Yeah, they just to add on to that, they actually get really mad if you badger the witness too. Like during the witness testimony, you can basically interrupt them and say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" and force them to elaborate on stuff. The judge will get really pissed off if you just keep like trying to brute your way through it and just interrupting every sentence. And even Edgeworth will object to like let the witness finish their testimony.
I really like this title because, like you mentioned about being railroaded in other games, yes, there's a clear path to victory in this game, but there's so many like branching things that can happen because you can try to pester for specific testimony, whereas in other games, like that just doesn't exist. But back to my gripes, I realize that it's a video game, but seriously, you're telling me there'd be no issue with a prosecutor coming up with a story for the witness on the stand about how he was the one that placed the wiretap instead of April May?
Oh, yes. Like, just to cut you off there, one of the things that drives me craziest about this title is how often the game will just screw you over. Um, Edgeworth obviously leads the witness multiple times. Like, he'll constantly say things like, "That's not relevant to this case." And it's like, wait a minute, how is like a lady not wiretapping a murder victim like not relevant to this case when she's
Yeah, exactly.
testifying about like how she saw the murder? Like, why is she here? Why is she witnessing this? Like, why is she watching this office? Clearly, there's something foul going on here, and these people are suspect. And it's just like, no, no, you're the one that did it. Like, why? Because I walked in to find the body. Like, I'm the criminal now. Like, what about these two people that are clearly like up to no good? Like, that's not relevant until it's relevant by using it as like the excuse to get out of the timeline that you set up to prove that they're the murderer.
Not only that, but having heard all of April May's testimony, and if he, being Edgeworth, if he knew it was false all along, which was actually the truth, why didn't he say anything? Especially since the story he made up was immediately proven to be a lie. An ethics committee would be up his ass in a minute.
Yeah, and I love how the judge is like, "Well, can you prove that, Mr. Wright?" It's like, "Wait a minute, I'm the defense attorney. You're the prosecutor. Shouldn't you guys be the one proving that I did it beyond a reasonable doubt? Like, why am I the one that has to prove my innocence when I've clearly poked enough holes in your story to make it look like you're an idiot?"
And on that note, kind of some backstory for the game itself. They don't explain this right away, and it might be the third trial that you actually get an understanding of why these things go so quickly.
I think it's part 2 of the second trial.
Yeah, it's way in the game, which is kind of weird, but you learn that the justice system has become so overburdened with criminals that they have decided to expedite the trial by making it only 3 days, a maximum of 3 days. You have to prove your client innocent, otherwise they're proven guilty, and that's it.
Yeah, I know we've used the term railroading a lot this episode, but like they're literally just railroading people through the justice system. It's like, yeah, if you are like up for a crime, you have like a day to set up for trial, and it's a 3-day trial maximum. And you're basically guilty until proven innocent because we just got to get through all this stuff. And we have like a really inept, stupid judge.
Yeah, it's only 3 days if the judge is like, well, you know what? Maybe we should take another look at this and try again tomorrow. But I guess.
Which then again drives me insane because after you poke enough holes in Red White's story, Red White, by the way, is the second trial. He's this guy that's like a blackmailer that ends up killing your boss. Spoiler alert. Um, and basically, he's trying to set you up as the murderer. And you poke all these holes in his story, and then Edgeworth sets it up where he uses this wiretap that was put in the office as the excuse to a lesser crime to get him out of the murder chair, which doesn't put the crime back on you in any way, by the way. And then you find another way to prove your innocence. And then after you do that, Edgeworth is like, Your Honor, can I have another like 48 hours to go look into this more? And the judge is just like, Yeah, I don't see why not. Like, wait a minute. If it's the prosecution, like they get all the time they want. But if I'm screwed, like I have to, prove that I'm not going to go to prison for the rest of my life here and now.
Not only that, but you aren't the first defendant. Initially, it's your boss's younger sister that is the alleged murderer. They switch it in the middle of the trial and they're like, all right, she's clearly innocent, but you, buddy, you're on the hook now.
Yeah, and it's all because, like, to clear her name, you end up going after this guy who is like the kingpin of this whole like blackmail agency. And he gets mad and he's like, I've got government connections. I'm going to testify and prove it's you now because you're interfering with my business. It's like, that's not how a trial works. You don't just take a case and put a brand new person on there. You got to set up like a whole different thing.
Yeah, it's clearly written by somebody that has no idea what is going on. And they just kind of make it this fantasy world about their whole reimagining of the criminal justice system. But I still have a lot of fun. But this will be the second trial.
Oh yeah, I mean the game is very entertaining. It's just so frustrating sometimes.
Oh, for sure. But after the first two trials, which are very courtroom focused, the third trial has nothing to do with the first two, which are linked together by the same murder weapon, by the way. And instead, it's set in a small film studio where they create a children's action show about a character called the Steel Samurai. And I really like this case, and I've always had a lot of fun with it, but there's one major detractor for me, and that's the director, Salmonella. All of his or most of his dialogue is written in leet speak, and that is annoying as hell. And on top, he's very pervy, and I know that's a common trope in a lot of Japanese games, but come on,
And
it wasn't necessary.
and surprisingly, the entertainment industry as a whole, we've learned.
Yeah, that's pretty topical, but that aside, I do like this case a lot, but there's one point where it feels more like a fetch quest than anything else. For example, you have to give a key card to Old Bag, so she'll give you some ultra rare cards to return to Cody, but he doesn't want them. Instead, he wants an ultra rare premium card, so you have to wander around and while backtracking, run into the stagehand, Penny, and show her the card, and she just so happens to have the ultra rare premium you need, So you can give it to Cody, so he'll cooperate. It just doesn't feel very organic all the time, whereas most of the other things in this game, they do.
Yeah, and to build on that, there's some points in this where you're just like, am I not a lawyer? Couldn't I just like set it up to hold you in contempt or something for not like helping with a criminal investigation? Like, aren't there laws against this sort of thing? It's just like, no, we're just gonna circumvent a lot of that, and we're just gonna have to get you like to pick up these magic cards basically to trade around.
Yeah, it's really wild because in our justice system, all evidence has to be like brought forth before the defense and prosecution. They both have to agree upon it with the judge. And here you can just kind of like roll into court the next day and be like, here you go. Found some more stuff out.
Where you bust out the cell phone and Edgeworth's like, "Where did you get that?" And you're like, "Oh, I guess the detective didn't tell you." And then Edgeworth does it to you where he's like, "Your autopsy report's out of date. I had another one done." It's like, weren't you supposed to disclose that like right away?
Yeah, some ridiculous stuff. Cory, I thought about this the entire time I was replaying it because you brought up a term that I had never heard like 2 years ago, and that was Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
It just kept resurfacing in my mind when I played this game because everything you need will always be something that you had to present, and nothing is really wasted for the most part.
I think that's a playwright term for a playwright named Chekhov, who basically, for those of you at home, he shows this gun mounted on the wall, and it foreshadows the fact that like now that it's in the play, it's going to be used in the third act basically. So that happens quite a lot in this game where it's like, yeah, here's this note, this is clearly going to be crazy important like 2 hours from now, and it's going to be revealed why like this murder note with, the lady's name written on it is actually a receipt for a glass
Lamp.
light stand that couldn't have been there, more than a day before the murder, which implicates the criminal. Like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, this is a really weird roundabout way of doing it, but thank you.
One thing that we haven't even mentioned, which really needs to be brought up, is that there's a lot of like spiritual or mysticism involved here where you have these women that are literally able to channel the dead. And it just so happens, coincidentally, that your boss and the younger sister are both in this family that are very well trained and adept in this channeling. And you will talk to your boss fairly often in this game, despite the fact that she died almost immediately.
Yeah, it turns out that your employer and her little sister and her mother are all like well-known mediums, and the mother was actually like tied into the second case as well because her name is sullied by this guy who does all this blackmail information, which ties further into like him killing your boss basically, I guess, because she's looking into her family's name being sullied. But it's a lot of weird like spiritual mysticism, and like you said, they're, the whole family's mediums. So there's kind of these weird outs where it's like, yeah, like this is the ghost of the dead lady talking, like check the receipt and prove that, he's a criminal. And then when he wheels his way out of that one, it's like, okay, yeah, now here's a list of like all the names he's blackmailing, and this is gonna force him to confess now.
It's super weird. And you mentioned earlier about dual destinies. As the games progress further in the series, they add a little twist to the game so that it kind of, refreshes it and makes it, so it doesn't go stale. And it just, some of them just get weirder and weirder and weirder. But this game is still, for the most part, pretty on the level, except the fourth case, which is not my favorite in this game. Like I said, the third trial is my favorite, and because of that, I didn't take a ton of great notes. I played it on the Switch initially, but I did replay most of the game all the way up to the third case or through the third case on my 3DS. So I have played it. I've watched the film and everything, and I have a fairly good memory about the last trial because Larry Butts is back, and this time the trial revolves around another another murder that took place at a lake with a spoof on the Loch Ness monster, and some really bizarre choices made by the writers involving some really unique witnesses. And I just wasn't a big fan of this trial because it reaches perhaps a little too far out there. But I recognize that it's still a fun brain teaser that forces you to think outside the box to solve the case.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with this series. And I mean, for all of its faults that we've kind of harped about, it's just a very campy like setting, and it's just this over the top overblown thing, and there's just a lot of entertaining things going on, as we've said. Anytime that you're playing as Phoenix and you get to like cross examine the witnesses or whatever, you get to shout objection and it comes across the screen in big red letters, or it's like take this, and you throw the evidence at them and you get all smug. And then like when the witnesses, or like when Edgeworth gets put in their place, like it's the very hyper stylized anime of their face like contorting into a completely different visual where it's like, "Oh, I've been caught in my lie." And it's just very cheesy and very fun.
It's so much fun, and it's one of the reasons why this game is so special to me. But I think we kind of both did a replay together. But if you have anything else you want to add, by all means, go for it.
No, I mean, I think I jumped in enough. I think my favorite was probably the second case, just because it is so like weird and twisty and turny. And it does really stack the deck against you because you are the defendant in the halfway point of the second case. And the fact that like everything is turned around on you, and now like you're fighting for your freedom basically, is just this really like interesting take on it, and it just becomes a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll give our final thoughts on the game before we close out this podcast. Welcome back, everybody. This is our last segment with our final thoughts. And to kick things off, because Chris isn't here, he did kind of give us his thoughts on the game. And this game is not for everybody. To quote him exactly, he said, "I hate to say it, but this game bored me to tears." He didn't really elaborate past that, but I can tell that this is not something that he enjoyed. But for me, my thoughts on this game, all the characters in the game are grossly exaggerated with their mannerisms and actions, like Cory was just mentioning, but it's all part of the charm that this game has. The cases are memorable and they're fun to solve. I absolutely love the music. I think it's amazingly composed and it fits the atmosphere of the game perfectly. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is a game that I have a lot of fond memories with. While it isn't something that I just pick up and play every once in a while like I will other games, I have a fondness for this one that I don't have with other visual novels or point and click adventures. This one is special to me, and like I said earlier, if you found anything in this podcast to be even mildly interesting, you can pick up the trilogy for around $10 on pretty much any major platform. So that's roughly $3 a game with hours and hours of gameplay in each one. In fact, I got on how long to beat. It says the average playtime is over 60 hours. And I'm just now learning that there's an any percent speedrunning category for this game. So I'm going to have to start checking out Ace Attorney speedruns, it seems. Cory, what are your thoughts on the game?
I like it. Um, I like it a lot. It's campy, it's overblown. It's just this very hyper stylized, fun take on storytelling. and it's kind of like a nice change of pace where I get to just be, you're still an active participant, but you're taking kind of a back seat to the characters. Whereas in other titles, if it's a first person shooter or even a strategy game or something, you're taking a much more active role. And this one, you just kind of get to sit back and enjoy the plot. And you're not. It's more of a TV series almost versus having to like put so much effort and time into like figuring out all the little strategies for some of these other games. So to me, it's just this wonderful little like sidetrack where we get to do that. And as you said, there are I think 5 cases in the current release now, and there's other titles for this series. So there's just a lot going on with this, and it's just a fun, entertaining game, and I just really enjoy it for that.
And I really like the fact that you can save anywhere at any time, but the intermissions are kind of, it's a well-paced game. That's what I'm trying to say. You're not like really forced to spend hours and hours and hours on the same thing beating your head, because you will have a chance to take a break, think about it, and get back to it when you want.
Yeah, and the game will bail you out sometimes. Your co-counsel will kind of throw you little tips and tricks if you kind of get flustered. Um, but it is one of those things like you're talking about where you can knock out one case or you can get halfway through something, and if you're done playing after like an hour or whatever, you can save it and sit it down and come back and not be like super lost. We've talked about how we want to do Chrono Trigger, for example,
Oh
and
God,
if
yeah.
you play Chrono Trigger and you don't stick with it like almost daily, you're not going to remember what you're doing in a game like that. So this is it's much less stressful, I would say.
Yeah, this is absolutely one of those games that is a it's a stress reducer, but also a stressful game at some points because of how, like you said, you're not that much of an active participant, but you do like have to get your client off the hook, or in some cases, you do have to, explain your own innocence in a trial.
Yeah, I mean, there's points where you definitely get frustrated, but I think that's more along the lines of the storytelling aspect and not quite the game itself. So I kind of separate those two in my head.
Yeah, and there's certainly nothing so obtuse that you see in a lot of other point and click adventures that are some of them are just ridiculous. And if you've ever played, oh gosh, I can't remember, but there's a Wikipedia article about it, and I think I've brought this up in podcasts before. But it's a goat puzzle, and it's just,
Yes, yeah, it's I think it was one of the King's Quest titles.
yeah, it's
We
something
did
like
that
that.
out.
But yeah, but I think that's everything. So, Cory, thanks a lot for playing this game. Chris, if you're listening to this in the future, I'm sorry you didn't enjoy it. It was only a matter of time before there was a game that I brought up that you didn't like. It's no Jurassic Park, but I do apologize for you not having much fun with it.
Well, see, the difference is that he doesn't like your title for personal taste reasons. We didn't like Jurassic Park because it sucked.
God, that game is just, it's so bad. It's so bad.
Guys, those of you listening at home, I think we've mentioned it before. Like that game is so highly rated too. Who is sipping the Kool Aid on that?
There's a cult following for that. People were excited about that game when it came out in that collection.
Yeah,
I don't
it's just such
understand.
hot garbage compared to the Genesis version.
It's so bad. It's bad compared to the NES version.
Yeah, it's just bad on its own. But like when the fact that you have this Super Nintendo title that came out like the same year as the like Jurassic Park Rampage, where you can like do the side-scrolling shooter and mess up a bunch of dinosaurs. It's like, my God, why would you want to play this crappy overworld title?
I don't know. I don't know. But that's a bad game. But we're going to play a good game for our next game. In fact, we're going to be playing Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to take me a while to play through it, despite already having played through, but I think I can knock it out. Cory, I'm sure you're going to speed run the game.
I'll probably I'll probably do something weird like play a bunch of Pokemon I wouldn't normally use to try to beat it. That's always fun.
You could always try a Nuzlocke challenge.
No, I'm not. I don't have the patience for that. Um, but we're doing Fire Red, Leaf Green, which is basically the same as Pokemon Yellow. It's an updated version, and the reason why we're doing this is I think that both Sean and Chris having to be forced to play through like a Gen One title, I wanted to give them the updated but still like classic feeling version of the game where the sprites have not been drastically changed, like Let's Go Pikachu or anything like that. So we're gonna go ahead and play through that. They're gonna get to see the game in color with the updated sprites and the separated move pools, and everything's gonna be fun. So I'm pretty excited to play through that and see what your guys' opinions are.
I've only got about 20 minutes in right now because I just started it, but I really hope that there's some quality of life improvements that were sorely needed.
Oh yeah, I mean you can already look at your moves in the game menu and see like
That's
what
so
their attack
nice.
damages are.
But with all that out of the way, I want to thank you, Cory, again. Chris, thank you for playing, even though you didn't like it. And all of you out there, thank you for listening to us. We are Superannuated Starman, and we'll catch you on next time.